on you. It seems we are to get new incentives for superannuation. Are you in favour of that?
Very much so. In fact, we had put a whole host of them in when we were in government in the last year. Well, we put through the term of our office, but a serious number of changes Peter Costello announced in 2007. Of course, last year, Labor withdrew quite a number of those, many of them really hurting small business. But if we can do things that encourage superannuation, that's a very important thing.
So you like that bit? There's going to be broad business tax relief.
I don't know what they're proposing and how they're going to fund it, but yes.
The principle you approve of?
The principle, yes.
And there's going to be broad business tax relief with small business getting a head start. Are you in favour of that?
Well, again, you've got to look at the smoke and mirrors in this story. Yeah. If they are imposing a multi-billion-dollar tax on the strongest sector in our economy, then and if they use that money to spend, that'll increase interest rates, which will affect small business. If they severely tax our strongest sector, it will affect the dividends from all of those companies. It'll affect the share price. The mums and dads of this country will pay for it, and small business, because what you will see is that most of their superannuation is tied up with all these blue chip companies, right? So they say the companies are going to pay for it. No, they won't. It'll be the mums and dads and the small business who've got their super, their life savings tied up in those sorts of shares and those dividends. So it's a question. If they shackle our strongest sector, that will threaten the prosperity that's going to come from that sector. And but you see, that's all it costs. You've got to look at the swings and roundabouts.
But you're in favour of superannuation incentives. You're in favour, presumably, of small business getting tax relief.
Yes.
And presumably you're in favour of money being spent on infrastructure. Now, what's the matter with paying for that by taxing resources companies in a boom?
There's a better way, Laurie. Because
what's the better way?
The better way
Who would you tax?
Well, I'd pay off the debt. You see, because what people don't...
That takes money as well. How would you pay off the debt?
Well, by taking some tough decisions. You see, they've got us into a total mess in this country. And we're ignoring the debt. There's $150 billion of net debt that they forecast that has to be paid off. We'll be paying, according to the last budget estimates, on average $12 billion a year in interest rates. Now, you talk about infrastructure. I'll give you infrastructure. $12 billion a year, that could pay to... 1 year you could pay to finish the Pacific Highway. 4 years you could do a very fast train from Melbourne to Sydney. Every year you could fund 6 gas-fired power stations. That's where the money...
But to stay with today's topic, what you're saying is that you wouldn't give incentives to super, you wouldn't cut company tax, you wouldn't build infrastructure because you would pay off the debt first. Is that the position? You do all of those things if you can afford it, Laurie. That's my point. Well, you can afford it if you charge this tax, presumably.
Well, if this is the trouble. Labor's instinct is to tax. That's their default position, not tough to see.
But if they're cutting taxes for one group and paying for it with another tax on another group, I mean, that's not necessarily increasing taxes.
Well, we don't know whether it'll be a net... I mean, in my view, knowing this government and seeing what they've done, their instinct is to try and spend their way out of a problem. They never think about who's going to pay for it. And you look historically, this is what's happened. Labor comes in and spends. We're the bunnies have to come in and fix it up. Now, they've done so much damage in 3 years. Usually that happens over 3 or 4 terms. They've done so much damage in 3 years. There is an urgency. It's why Malcolm Turnbull's back in the race. He sees as a need, as we all do, to get in and again fix up this mess. Off the back of a world recession and the sort of mess they've made of governing, there aren't any easy answers. No magic pudding.
When you talk about taxing and spending, do you see an irony that today the government, we're led to believe, will propose company taxes with the emphasis on small business, at the same time as Tony Abbott's coalition is already committed to increasing taxes on companies with a taxable income of more than $5 million?
Well, that's a short-term levy
to pay for a big spending item.
To pay for a productivity item.
Well, a very generous parental leave.
The only answer to getting out of this mess is to pay off the debt and to put a strong focus on productivity. So parental leave is a productivity measure. If you can if we've spent billions of dollars training and educating a very powerful workforce in women, if we can do things to keep them in the workforce as they wish to, then that is a very strong productivity measure going forward. We are losing so many women at that stage who don't then go on to have substantial careers. That is a very significant part of going forward.
Do you believe that ordinary Australians are getting a fair share of the money from the minerals boom?
I do think they are, Laurie. The minerals industry paid $21 billion of tax last year. They've contributed $334 billion, according to the government, since 2004 or 5, right? I mean, I've had experience, fortunately. I've been on investment teams for some of these big companies. I know how competitive it is, even within the company itself. All of these big companies have got resources all over the world that they can develop. And if they have competitive teams within their company, if Australian projects are made uncompetitive by getting what is virtually a 60% company tax on these minerals, then there's every prospect of a lot of these projects being shelved and going off to Argentina, Brazil, Eastern Europe or wherever.
But what about the argument that taxes as a share of profits in the resources industry have almost halved over the last decade?
Because if you look, it's a very neat use of statistics, right? Because the 15 years before that, the mining industry was on its knees, right? And they go through booms and busts, and you've got to use the opportunity. But in the end, when a boom is on, when there's opportunities there, as there are now, we've got to remember that we're in a world market. So those resource companies will go to where they can maximise their returns during the boom so they can see their way through a bust, right? So it's not an opportunity to rip all the profits out of it. They've got options. They have got options. And if this move stops or delays for a decade or more Olympic Dam in South Australia, what's that do to South Australians' prosperity over the next 10 or 20 years? That's the working lifetime of a lot of people. That could be materially undermined by this initiative, which appears to be coming down the pipeline from this reform. This government does not understand business. It does not understand how to manage money. They are obsessed with taxing. They think someone's making a lot of money, they're ripe for...
Well, I would make the point, though, that at the moment it's your party that's committed to a new tax.
No, they've ETS, the taxing they've done so far, the spending they've done so far...
ETS is off.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's been put up. I assume you're in favour of that because you didn't like the ETS.
That's right, yeah, but, well, they say it's off. How can you trust them? I mean, the thing is... Kevin Rudd has broken endless promises. There's been no government, like no Labor government, state or federal, in history of this country who's paid off debt, who's paid off the debt. No state or federal Labor government. This will happen again. We'll have to come in at some stage and clean up the mess. You know, I suggest it should be this year.
Well, one final question. The Henry Report's going to contain quite a lot of nasties, which the government will say are not on, they won't accept them, they won't implement them. Will you accept those assurances?
No, Laurie. I mean, they've broken so many promises. You can't. There are a number of key promises I made about private health insurance and other things before the last election. They meant nothing. Superannuation, they said they wouldn't change. They meant nothing. I don't trust this mob as far as you can kick them, because they have not been able to deliver. They mismanaged comprehensively programs. There's not one major program they've implemented. They've broken lots of promises, and you can't trust whatever comes. This is a political exercise and a tax grab rather than reform. You know, they'll dress it up as reform, and there'll be good elements in there, but how's it going to be paid for? You know, will they deliver it? Can they deliver it? These are all the questions that I think people are now starting to really ask.
Well, we'll know soon. Mr. Robb, thank you.
Thanks, Laurie.
Back to you, Cam.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laurie. We know that our